Great. So today we have the beloved Kabir. Kabir is truly, I have not taken enough time with Kabir, I always feel, because every time I dip into one of his poems, it opens up something within for me that uh, feels aligned, feels resonant. I mean, feels so resonant that I wonder, wow, I wonder if I was Kabir back in the 1400s. It feels that aligned. And so he's a beloved mystic for me. And one that while he's esteemed, he's not really passed on as much as like Rumi and Hafiz and Mirabai and other saints and mystics that we know their writings. And I think that part of that reason that he doesn't permeate the mainstream culture as much is because he's a bit of a jokester, he's a bit of a trickster, and he plays with his poems and prose more. You know, when we read a line of some other mystics, Rumi, a very, very popular one, it's so melodic. You know, it's really kind of like rushes upon us. And I would say John of the Cross in the Christian tradition, similar, just rushes up upon us with a pleasantness. The phrases are nice, the rhythm is nice. But Kabir, he's hearty and he's chunky and he's got some really melodic poems, but many of his poems are him making jokes in them, or him turning a phrase, or him pointing a finger, or him and while he's held in very high esteem, he's not as much a balm on the soul all the time, but isolated phrases from his poems will really rest on you. So very, very lightly, the year of his birth is largely unknown. They think it's in the 1300s. They're uncertain. What they do believe is true is that he grew up in a Muslim family, and he, like all mystics, was so affected by his experience of God. He uses the word God, that he becomes very much a solitary teacher, an explorer of mystic tradition. And one of his main contributions is to move away from the delusions that we have of what it means to be who we are. And one of his biggest platforms is to break down the delusion of religious identity. That's incredible, right? Think about that. So you have, most mystics are not truly totally accepted in their time. Most mystics aren't, because they're on the edge of the evolution of the times. And so it would be difficult for society around them to adapt because they embody change. Kabir is taking a strong stance against religious identity. So, like me, many mystics don't take a stance against something. We just embody and stand for something. And it just happens to not fit in a variety of cultures. So you can see the difference there. And there is a belief that he was persecuted, that he did get beat, that he did experience oppression for his stances, but he stood very, very strong. And he was rejected by his Muslim culture. He was rejected by the Hindu culture in which he found himself operating. And then after his death, he was claimed by them both. And some of his poetry is even in Sikh inspired texts as well. So you can find him in Hindu texts, in Sikh texts, and in Muslim texts, which again, right? So he was given a really great gift of freedom, wasn't he? I mean, think about that. He was so moved by his experience of God that he spoke freely about the freedom, the imperative of walking the path of freedom from all things. And when I was preparing for this morning, I started going down that rabbit hole a little bit because it is tricky. It's tricky because we grow up in a culture that has mores and societal norms, and we grew up in a culture. And there's something really beautiful about that. Like, think about when you go to a foreign country and they're having one of their festivals and everyone's dressed in the clothing that they would have worn 1,000 years earlier, and they're doing their traditional dances. That's a culture. That's a social norm that's being passed on. And it feels great, doesn't it? It feels like something beautiful is being carried on. And yet, in our personal growth process, we end up having to die to being part of a culture and a social norm just for the sake of belonging. And we discover that our belonging is an eternal belonging. And it doesn't mean that we don't fit into the culture around us, where we don't speak the same language or love the same feast days or observe certain holidays or care for certain movements that happen in our culture. It doesn't mean that. It's much more subtle than that. But social adaptation is a very tricky thing. You know, I did a little Google search on the phrase social adaptation. And what was very interesting is that in the psychology dictionary, this is a dictionary that's devoted to all psychology, that when you get to social adaptation, it is a subtitle to anxiety disorders. And think about that. So anxiety is a certain displacement. It's a tension and a stress that leaves you feeling a bit displaced. So social adaptation is a defense mechanism that lets us feel at ease in our environment. And yet adaptation is not all bad. I mean, children being raised are taught things that are socially acceptable, saying please, saying thank you. I don't know if that's as popular today, but it was when I grew up. And so the definition is the adjustment to the demands, restrictions, and morals of society where we all live in harmony. And living in harmony is important, right? And yet someone like Kabir, he was a disturber of the peace. Constantly a disturber of the peace. So it lets us this morning open up to this question. Where do I adapt in a way that limits my spirituality, that limits the freedom that I am feeling myself called to? Not where do I adapt in ways that make sense. So let's not go to the social norms that allow us to stop at stop signs and observe things like that. Let's not jump off that edge. But where do I adapt? Where do I accept this is the way things are for reasons that seem good? I want to belong. I want to have a sense of identity, even identity among a tradition, identity among a community. Where do I adapt in ways that are right in this very moment limiting me? I'm going to read a Kabir poem that's the basis of our reflection, our meditation today. And there's one phrase that I'm going to bring forward into our meditation practice that stirred me to tears when I was reading it yesterday. And please forgive the gender references. You know, many of these mystics of other times, all the gender is he. And even though I substitute in he and she, we know that the God source is neither gender and both and all gender. We may discover that gender is more than two. What kind of God would he be if he did not hear the bangles ring on an ant's wrist as they move the earth in their sweet dance? And what kind of God would she be if a leaf's prayer was not as precious to creation as the prayer her own son sang from the glorious depth of his soul for us? And what kind of God would he be if the vote of millions in the world could sway him to change the divine law of love that speaks so clearly with compassion's elegant tongue, saying, eternally saying, all are forgiven. Moreover, dears, no one has ever been guilty. What kind of God would he be if he did not count the blinks of your eyes and is in absolute awe of their movement? What a God. What a God we have. There's one phrase in this poem that will be the foundation for our meditation today. I'm going to read the whole passage and we'll get to the phrase. What kind of God would she be if the vote of millions in this world could sway her to change the divine law of love that speaks so clearly with compassion's elegant tongue, eternally saying all are forgiven? Moreover, dears, no one has ever been guilty. So Kabir had the experience that the eternal speaks with a tongue of compassion. And a tongue, it's very physical, right? It's very dense. It is part of, as a human being, what makes it possible for us to speak. If you hear people who don't have a tongue, their speech is muddied, it's muddled. So it's very foundational to speech. So he points out that compassion is the tongue of this eternal. It's that foundational. And that this tongue says eternally, that is through all time and through all space. This one phrase, all are forgiven. Moreover, dears, no one has ever been guilty. I mean, I welled up when I revisited this poem yesterday. The possibility, the reality, say reality, you could say possibility, that not only are all forgiven, but that in our process of stepping stone, all are forgiven, we naturally move into the finality that none were ever guilty. That we were never guilty. We were never guilty. We were never guilty. We are never guilty. We are never guilty. For those, because I know all of us here are sensitive in our path and desire to be good and to do good. And our struggles are not so much the doing good part in as much as the feeling guilty for falling short part. At least I have found in most of the community that I draw on, and I would say so for myself. What does that taste like? To discover, to really discover that we have been and never will be guilty. And what freedom does that give us to love? It takes away an unconscious mechanism. There's a certain collective consciousness that we are in that has such a heavy air of cause and effect that exists, cause and effect. But cause and effect, in its tactical sense, sells us short on who and what we are. Because if we have never been guilty and we can tap into that eternal source of compassion and love within ourselves, we find ourselves naturally oriented along the path of compassion, naturally oriented. We find ourselves in the flow of the stream of that. And we find ourselves alighted in unexpected ways because our minds are no longer encumbered by the mechanisms that have socially adapted us to the notions of right and wrong. And we tap into the orientation of our essential nature to be good and do good and love unconditionally. Wow, right? I just want to give just a moment for us to reflect on that in silence, because I don't know, the words really open me up with the possibilities of being and becoming. And so today's meditation to accompany this reflection is one of the heart. So I invite you to close your eyes. And bring the left fingers and let them tap on the center of the chest near the sternum. This is the area of the heart chakra. Just tap. And as you tap, let your inward gaze come down to where you're tapping. And if you're able, imagine or sense that your heart and your heart chakra, that in this tap that it's opening, that the energy of your heart is opening. Like you're knocking on a door of a loved one and the door is opening. Breathe into this tapping. Let the tapping cease, but let the inward gaze and the breath stay with this part of your body. And on every breath, see if you can envision and allow the heart and the heart chakra to open energetically in every direction. Imagine it as a sphere of light that just simply opens. We're doing a guided visualization. Open it in the front, open it in the back. open it in every direction. Let these words resound within as you open the heart. Moreover, my dear, you have never been guilty. Moreover, my dear, I sit in awe of every blink of your eye. If you are able, imagine or sense that there is an eternal one that is gazing within you and upon you, cherishing you, cherishing. And let the light of this heart energy move through your entire physical body, washing every cell of the trauma that it carries. Refreshing every cell, everything from head to toe, refreshing you. See if you can notice that as you remain with this energetic heart washing, that you experience it like waves or subtle shifting that moves through the physical body. Whether this feels easy or difficult to do, it's not a sign of it happening or not happening. For we're not the agent of these deep eternal movements. We are the expression of it. So we allow the light of this compassionate tongue to speak to sound within us, to teach us anew. And as we bring this short meditative experience to a close, let your left hand bring its fingers to the chest once again and tap ever so lightly on the sternum. And let yourself have an inward smile and an outward smile. And say to yourself, I am awakening to love. I am awakening to love. I am awakening. And let the fingers cease. And when you are ready, open your eyes. Great to be with you.